Jim Caviezel walks into the Sterling, one of Beverly Hills' most exclusive restaurants, wearing a simple black sweater and dark jeans, a small silver cross necklace catching the light as he moves through the elegant dining room filled with crystal chandeliers and soft piano music. He approaches the hostess stand quietly, his presence understated and humble, when a young waiter named Derek notices the cross and immediately scoffs loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Seriously? You're wearing that superstitious garbage in here?" Derek sneers, his voice dripping with contempt as he points directly at the necklace. "This is a place for intelligent people, not fairy tale believers." But what Derek doesn't know is that he's just mocked the cross necklace of the man who portrayed Jesus Christ in the most powerful religious film ever made. And what happens next will not only silence the entire restaurant, but reveal a truth so profound that it will change every person present forever. The man standing before him isn't just any believer. He's the actor who suffered through one of the most brutal and authentic crucifixion scenes in cinema history. And his response to this mockery will shake everyone to their core. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if stories of faith and courage inspire you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow at 2 p.m., we have another powerful story that will move your heart. What's about to unfold at the Sterling restaurant will prove that sometimes the most profound moments happen when we least expect them. If Derek hadn't chosen to attack Jim's faith so publicly and cruelly, the entire dining room would never have witnessed one of the most powerful displays of grace under fire that anyone had ever seen. The waiter's mockery was about to backfire in ways he could never imagine, because the man he was ridiculing wasn't just wearing that cross as a symbol. He had literally bled for it, suffered for it, and transformed his entire life because of what it represented. What Derek was about to discover would not only expose his own ignorance, but would teach everyone present a lesson about the true meaning of faith, forgiveness, and the incredible power that comes from responding to hatred with love. The Sterling restaurant stood as a monument to modern sophistication in the heart of Beverly Hills, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city's glittering skyline. Inside, the atmosphere was carefully orchestrated perfection. Imported Italian marble floors, hand-blown glass sculptures, and tables that cost more than most people's monthly rent. This wasn't just a restaurant, it was a statement. A place where Hollywood's elite came to see and be seen, where every conversation was conducted in hushed, important tones, and where the staff prided themselves on serving only the most influential clientele in Los Angeles. Derek Martinez had been working at the Sterling for 3 years, and in that time, he had developed what he considered a sophisticated worldview that set him apart from what he saw as the ignorant masses. At 28 years old, with perfectly styled dark hair and an expensive smile, Derek moved through the dining room like he owned it, his tailored black uniform and polished shoes reflecting his belief that he was destined for something greater than serving tables. He had studied philosophy at UCLA, read every atheist manifesto he could get his hands on, and considered himself an intellectual warrior against what he called the superstitious delusions that hold humanity back. Derek's disdain for religion wasn't just philosophical, it was personal and passionate. He viewed religious symbols, especially crosses, as signs of weakness and intellectual inferiority. In his mind, anyone who displayed their faith publicly was either uneducated, brainwashed, or simply too weak to face reality without the crutch of fantasy. He had made it his personal mission to enlighten people whenever possible, often making cutting remarks about religious jewelry, blessing rituals, or any mention of faith he encountered during his shifts. The other staff members had grown uncomfortable with Derek's aggressive atheism, but his charm with wealthy customers and his ability to upsell expensive wines had kept him employed despite numerous complaints. He saw the Sterling as his platform, his stage where he could subtly influence the conversations and beliefs of the powerful people who dined there. Tonight, however, Derek's arrogance and contempt for faith was about to collide with a force he never saw coming, and his carefully constructed worldview was about to crumble in the most public and humbling way imaginable. Jim Caviezel entered the Sterling with the same quiet dignity that had defined his entire career. His weathered hands clasped gently in front of him as he approached the hostess station. The small silver cross at his throat wasn't flashy or ornate. It was simple, worn smooth from years of wear, the kind of piece that spoke of genuine faith rather than display. Jim had worn this particular cross every day since filming The Passion of the Christ, a constant reminder of the spiritual transformation he had experienced during those grueling months of production, when he had literally been struck by lightning while hanging on the cross and had suffered a dislocated shoulder that required surgery. As Jim waited patiently for the hostess to seat him, Derek happened to be passing by with a tray of champagne glasses when his eyes locked onto the cross necklace. His expression immediately shifted from professional courtesy to barely concealed disgust, his jaw tightening as he set down the tray with unnecessary force on a nearby service station. Derek had served hundreds of customers wearing religious jewelry before, but something about this particular moment triggered his deepest contempt. Perhaps it was the way Jim carried himself with such quiet confidence. Or maybe it was simply that Derek had had a particularly frustrating day, dealing with what he considered the ignorant masses. "Excuse me," Derek said, abandoning all pretense of professional behavior as he stepped directly into Jim's path, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of several nearby tables. "Are you seriously wearing that thing in here?" He pointed directly at the cross with an expression of theatrical disbelief, as if Jim had walked in wearing a costume. "I mean, really, this is 2025, not the Dark Ages. Do you actually believe that some guy in the sky is going to grant your wishes if you wear his torture device around your neck?" Jim looked up calmly, his deep blue eyes meeting Derek's gaze without a trace of anger or defensiveness. "I'm just here for dinner," he said quietly, his voice carrying the same gentle strength that had captivated millions of moviegoers, though Derek was too blinded by his own arrogance to recognize it. The hostess, clearly mortified by Derek's behavior, tried to intervene, but Derek waved her off dismissively. No, I think this is important," Derek continued, his voice growing louder as he sensed an audience forming among the nearby diners. "I'm genuinely curious. Do you pray to that necklace? Do you think it has magical powers? Because I've got to tell you, from where I'm standing, it just looks like you're wearing a symbol of one of history's most brutal execution methods. Kind of morbid, don't you think?" Derek's words hung in the air like poison, and several customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that something deeply inappropriate was unfolding before their eyes. Derek's initial attack was just the beginning, and as he noticed several diners watching the exchange with uncomfortable fascination, he seemed to feed off the attention like a performer who had finally found his stage. After reluctantly allowing Jim to be seated at a corner table, Derek made it his personal mission to turn the evening into what he considered an educational opportunity about the dangers of religious delusion. Every time he passed Jim's table, he made increasingly bold and cruel comments, his voice growing louder with each encounter as his confidence swelled. When Derek brought Jim's water, he set the glass down with exaggerated ceremony and announced, "Here's your water. No need to turn it into wine. I'm sure the regular stuff will do just fine." Several nearby tables turned to stare, and a well-dressed couple at the adjacent table exchanged shocked glances. The woman whispered to her husband, "This is completely inappropriate. That waiter has lost his mind." But Derek was just getting started, intoxicated by what he perceived as his intellectual superiority over this simple believer. As Jim quietly studied the menu, Derek returned with a breadbasket and couldn't resist another public humiliation. "So tell me," he said, loud enough for half the dining room to hear, "when you pray before meals, Do you actually think someone up there is listening? Or is it just a habit left over from childhood before you learn to think for yourself? Jim maintained his composure, simply nodding politely and saying, "Thank you for the bread." But Derek interpreted this calm response as weakness and pressed his attack even further. The situation escalated dramatically when Derek brought Jim's appetizer, a beautifully plated salmon dish that he set down with theatrical flair. "Here you go, fresh salmon, caught by real fishermen using actual nets and boats, not by some magical multiplication trick," he announced with a smirk. "I assume you'll want to bless this before eating? Maybe ask your invisible friend to make sure it's not poisoned." The mockery was so blatant and cruel that other diners began to murmur among themselves, clearly disturbed by Derek's behavior. A family with 2 young children at a nearby table looked visibly upset, with the father placing protective hands over his children's ears as Derek's attacks grew more vicious. An elderly gentleman in an expensive suit finally spoke up, his voice stern with disapproval. "Young man, this is completely unacceptable behavior. You're ruining everyone's dining experience." But Derek was too deep into his performance to stop now, turning his attention briefly to the elderly man with a condescending smile. "I'm sorry if the truth makes you uncomfortable, sir, but I think it's important to challenge these outdated superstitions wherever we find them," Derek replied with false politeness. "This gentleman is advertising his belief in fairy tales. And frankly, in a place like this, surrounded by intelligent, successful people, it's almost insulting to pretend that mythology deserves the same respect as rational thought." Derek's words cut through the restaurant like a blade, and the tension in the air became so thick that even the soft piano music seemed to fade into uncomfortable silence. Jim sat through it all with remarkable grace, occasionally glancing up at Derek with eyes that seemed to hold depths of understanding and forgiveness that Derek couldn't begin to comprehend. What Derek didn't realize was that every cruel word, every mocking gesture, was being absorbed by a man who had spent months preparing to portray the ultimate symbol of sacrificial love, and whose response to this persecution would soon demonstrate the very principles that Derek was so desperately trying to destroy. The turning point came when Derek's behavior finally crossed a line that even the Sterling's management couldn't ignore. A prominent entertainment lawyer dining with his family had quietly summoned the restaurant manager, Sarah Chen, after watching Derek's increasingly vicious attacks on Jim's faith. Sarah, an elegant woman in her 40s who had built the Sterling's reputation on impeccable service and discretion, approached the table with the intention of quietly resolving what she assumed was a minor dispute between staff and customer. But as she drew closer and got her first clear look at the man sitting calmly at the corner table, her professional composure cracked completely. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her hand flying to her mouth as recognition hit her like a physical blow. She had seen The Passion of the Christ 3 times, had wept through every viewing, and now found herself face to face with the man who had endured one of the most brutal and authentic portrayals of Christ's suffering ever captured on film. "Mr. Caviezel," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of reverence and horror at what she had just witnessed. "I had absolutely no idea you were dining with us tonight. Please, please forgive what just happened. This is unconscionable." The effect of Sarah's words rippled through the dining room like an earthquake. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as diners turned to stare, their faces transforming from casual curiosity to stunned recognition. A woman at a nearby table gasped audibly and grabbed her husband's arm, whispering urgently, "That's him. That's the actor who played Jesus Christ." The whispers spread from table to table like wildfire. "Jim Caviezel, The Passion of the Christ. He's the one who was struck by lightning during filming. He literally bled for that role." Derek, who had been standing smugly beside the table, waiting to deliver another cutting remark about Jim's primitive beliefs, suddenly found himself frozen in place as the magnitude of his mistake crashed down upon him. His face drained of all color as he realized he had been publicly mocking and humiliating not just any believer, but the man who had given one of the most powerful and sacrificial performances in cinema history. The actor who had suffered a dislocated shoulder, hypothermia, and countless other injuries while bringing the story of Christ's crucifixion to life with unprecedented authenticity and reverence. The silence in the restaurant was deafening, broken only by the soft clink of silverware as diners set down their forks and turned their full attention to the unfolding drama. Derek's hands began to shake as he looked around the room and saw the faces of people he had been trying to impress, now staring at him with expressions of disgust and disbelief. The intellectual superiority he had felt just moments before evaporated completely, replaced by a crushing awareness of his own ignorance and cruelty. "Mr. Caviezel," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger as she tried to salvage the situation, "your meal tonight is completely complimentary, and I want you to know that this employee's behavior in no way represents the values of our establishment." She turned to Derek with eyes blazing with professional fury. "Derek, you need to step away from this table immediately and report to my office. Your behavior tonight has been absolutely disgraceful." But it was too late for damage control. The revelation had already transformed the entire atmosphere of the restaurant, and every person present understood that they had just witnessed something profound and terrible. The public humiliation of a man whose faith had been tested by literal crucifixion, whose belief had been forged in the fires of one of the most physically and spiritually demanding roles ever attempted. Derek stood there shaking, finally understanding that his attacks on what he had dismissed as fairy tales had been directed at someone who had lived those stories, suffered for them, and emerged with a faith deeper than Derek could possibly comprehend. What happened next would be remembered by every person in that restaurant for the rest of their lives. Instead of the anger, humiliation, or righteous indignation that Derek's cruel behavior had earned, Jim Caviezel slowly stood up from his chair with the same quiet dignity that had defined his entire evening. His movements were deliberate and calm, and as he rose to his full height, there was something almost otherworldly about his presence, the same spiritual gravity that had made his portrayal of Christ so devastating and authentic. The entire dining room held its breath, waiting to see how one of Hollywood's most respected actors would respond to such public mockery of his deepest beliefs. Jim looked directly at Derek, whose face was now streaked with tears of shame and whose body trembled with the weight of his realization. But instead of condemnation in Jim's eyes, there was something that Derek had never expected to see: compassion, understanding, and a depth of forgiveness that seemed to flow from some inexhaustible well of grace. "Derek," Jim said softly, his voice carrying the same gentle authority that had captivated millions of viewers, "I want you to know that I forgive you completely. Not because you deserve it, but because forgiveness isn't about what we deserve. It's about what love requires." The words hit Derek like a physical blow, and he stumbled backward slightly, completely overwhelmed by the unexpected mercy he was receiving. Jim continued, his voice growing stronger, but never losing its warmth. "You mocked this cross tonight, called it a symbol of torture and superstition. But you know what? You're absolutely right. It is a symbol of torture. It represents the most brutal form of execution ever devised by human cruelty. But it's also something infinitely more powerful than that." Jim reached up and gently touched the simple silver cross at his throat, and every eye in the restaurant followed the movement. "When I wore a crown of thorns for 5 months, during the filming of The Passion, when I felt the nails and the whips and the weight of that cross, I learned something that changed my life forever. This isn't just jewelry, Derek. This is a reminder that someone loved us enough to endure unimaginable suffering, so that moments like this, moments when we fail, when we hurt others, when we let our pride and anger consume us, these moments don't have to define us." The restaurant had become a sanctuary, every conversation forgotten as diners found themselves witnessing something far more profound than they had ever expected to encounter during a simple dinner out. A young woman at a corner table was quietly weeping, and several other patrons had their hands clasped as if in prayer. Jim's presence seemed to fill the entire space, not with celebrity or fame, but with something much deeper, a kind of spiritual authority that came from having suffered for what he believed. "You see, Derek," Jim continued, his voice now addressing not just the waiter, but every person present. "The beauty of faith isn't that it makes us perfect or superior to anyone else. The beauty is that it teaches us we're all broken, we all fall short, and we all need grace. Tonight, you attacked my beliefs because you thought they made me weak, ignorant, or deluded. But what you didn't understand is that these beliefs have given me the strength to forgive the very person who just spent the evening trying to destroy them." Jim stepped closer to Derek, who was now openly sobbing, and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "The cross you mocked tonight isn't about judgment, son. It's about redemption. It's about the radical idea that no matter how far we fall, no matter how cruel we become, no matter how lost we feel, there's always a way back. There's always forgiveness. There's always hope." The silence in the restaurant was profound and sacred, broken only by Derek's quiet weeping and the distant sounds of the city beyond the windows. Jim reached into his wallet and pulled out several $100 bills, placing them on the table, not as payment for his meal, but as a tip for Derek. "This is for you," he said quietly. "Not because you earned it with your service tonight, but because I want you to remember that grace isn't something we earn. It's something we receive, and then something we give to others." As Jim prepared to leave, he turned one final time to address the entire restaurant, his voice carrying to every corner of the dining room. "Tonight, all of you witnessed something beautiful. Not my forgiveness, but Derek's humanity. Underneath his anger and mockery was a young man searching for truth, for meaning, for something real to believe in. We all have that search in common, whether we wear crosses or not. The question isn't whether we believe in God. The question is whether we believe in love, in forgiveness, in the possibility that we can be better tomorrow than we were today." Jim walked toward the exit with the same quiet dignity with which he had entered, but the restaurant he left behind was transformed. Derek stood in the center of the dining room, no longer the arrogant intellectual warrior he had been an hour earlier, but a broken and humbled young man who had just encountered a grace so profound it had shattered every assumption he had ever made about faith, about believers, and about the power of love to overcome hatred. As the door closed behind Jim Caviezel, the entire restaurant remained in reverent silence, each person knowing they had just witnessed not a celebrity encounter, but a miracle of forgiveness that would change their understanding of what it truly means to live with faith, hope, and love.